On Monday, Colleen and I will get an email from somebody who's visited here, and they'll say, "What translation of the Bible does your church use?" And when I get that email tomorrow, I'm going to say, "No idea. No idea what we use." Orgies. Orgies are not right? I mean, we can't do orgies? I didn't know that. Shoot. They cancel the one for Tuesday night. This passage from Luke begins a 10-chapter section that's often called the travel narrative. It begins toward the end of chapter 9 and goes to the middle of chapter 19. The beginning of it is where Jesus has predicted, has informed the disciples that they're going up to Jerusalem, and he is going to be arrested and betrayed and deserted and tried and crucified, and on the third day he will rise from the dead. He gives that speech twice to the disciples, and then they begin what's called the travel narrative that ends with Palm Sunday in Jerusalem. Now, travel narrative sounds kind of neat, doesn't it? It sounds kind of like, Viking river cruises, where, you can eat all the lutefisk you want. Or, Royal Caribbean, where you can have all the goat stew you want. But this is not really, a luxury cruise that would be advertised before and after Downton Abbey. This is more like a mission trip. Now, when I've gone on mission trips, often we'll sleep, 10 to a room, 15 to a room. You have to put up with people snoring. Sometimes you sleep on church basement floors. You have maybe 20 people sharing a shower. Not all at once. You wait in line. You are kind of roughing it on a mission trip. One of the first mission trips I took with King Avenue people to Mexico, the Mexicans put us up in what in this country would be called a no-tell motel. You'd probably rent by the hour. But I thought it was great. I mean, you had these rooms were air conditioned. You had your own shower. The water was kind of cold, but you had your own shower. You even had a TV in the room. You only shared your room with one other person. I thought this was great compared to church basements and so on. And about the third day, the group discovered that there was a Holiday Inn Express in the town. And there was this rebellion. They wanted me to move them to the Holiday Inn Express and make sure next year we would be in the Holiday Inn Express, not in this other motel. Well, that's not going to happen because that's not a mission trip. You have to rough it on a mission trip with your own bed and your own shower and your own TV and your air conditioning. So this is a mission trip, and it says Jesus has set his face firmly toward Jerusalem. He is going to Jerusalem, and nothing's going to deter him. And on this mission trip, they're going to do some stuff. They're going to eat dinner with Zacchaeus. They're going to eat dinner with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. They're going to hear about the prodigal son. They're going to hear about the Good Samaritan and the publican and the Pharisee. They're going to learn how to pray. But this is not really organized lectures that Jesus is giving. It's kind of question and answer. As things pop up, Jesus will just converse with them on the road. So it's a travel narrative with conversations. The Jesus that we encounter here is not the Jesus that we tend to like or be attracted to. It's not the Jesus who says, "Come unto me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." It's not that Jesus. It's the Jesus who says, "Follow me." It's a demanding Jesus. It's a Jesus who doesn't say, "Well, I'll put a bib on you while I'll feed you." It's a Jesus who says, "Put on an apron, get to work." it's a Jesus who's saying, it's my agenda, not yours. It's my road, not yours. One writer has talked about the every era in the church history, we go through a period of what he calls discipleship inflation, where what would be considered just normal, acceptable behavior becomes extraordinary discipleship. You know, kind of like opening the door for somebody who's carrying a bunch of packages becomes extraordinary discipleship. It's like in school when what used to be a C is now an A. Kierkegaard tells the story of a brewery that was selling beer, and they were selling it for a nickel a bottle. This was a long time ago. And they weren't selling any. So they decided to sell it for 3 cents. And they sold a tremendous amount, and somebody said, but you're losing money. You're losing money. And they said, oh, that doesn't matter. It's the number that makes the difference. And it's kind of as we devalue discipleship, it's the number that makes the difference. And Jesus would say, no, that's not right. So as Jesus is having these conversations with the disciples on the road, he's teaching them what to do as disciples. He's teaching them how to do it. This is this part about prayer. It's the part about humility. It's the part about should we rain fire down on those who disagree with us? No, vengeance is not up to the disciple. Violence is not an option for the disciple. Then the third thing that he's teaching them is the mindset they're supposed to have as disciples. And this is what this scripture lesson is about. What's the mindset a disciple should have? Well, the first one is this person runs up to Jesus and says, I'll do anything you want. I'll do anything you want. And Jesus says, okay, here's what I want. Oh, I can't do that. Years ago, we had a kid in one of our churches that was a really likable kid, but he was always messing up. And he got arrested once and had some legal problems. And this person of means in the church came up to me and said, I would do anything for him. I would do anything. You tell me and I'll do it. And I said, well, he needs about $2,000 in legal fees. I'll do anything for him. I'll do anything. But they weren't going to do that. They weren't going to do that. What Jesus is saying here is we have to move in our discipleship from general to specific. You know, it's easy to love everyone. It's easy to love all of humanity. It's easy to love all of the blenders. But then, love him. I believe in forgiving everyone. I forgive everyone. But then, forgive Andy? Can't do it. Can't do it. Nobody awed on you, Andy. Nobody cared. Yeah, I can't forgive. Anne Lamott, in her recent book, says, I'm not one of those Christians that's heavily into forgiveness. I'm one of the other kind. Yeah. We like it general, but when it gets specific, it gets very difficult. And I think with Jesus here, I'll do anything you want. Well, I want you to do this. That's where it becomes difficult for us. And that's what the incarnation is. We can have a romance with love. We can have a romance with compassion. But the incarnation says, live it specifically with this person. And it's hard. It's hard. The second mindset after moving from general to specific is where the man says, I want to follow you. And Jesus says, great, let's get going. And the man says, but first let me bury my father. Now that sounds really reasonable. Let me bury my father. And Jesus says, no, let the dead bury the dead. What he's going for here is, let the dead bury the dead, not the living. And often the dead do bury the living because we get stuck in how it's always been and how it's always supposed to be. There's a difference between respecting tradition and traditionalism. Tradition is the living faith of the dead, and traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. An example of tradition of the living faith of the dead is the Huggins Fund. William Huggins gave $600,000 to King Avenue Church. William Huggins died years ago, but his faith is still alive as we use that fund and replenish that fund to start the blenders, to get the keyboard, to get the instruments, to hire people, to hire welcome desk people and children's directors. It's been used. The living faith of the dead has been so helpful at King Avenue. It's enriched us and made us who we are. The dead faith of the living, we've always done it that way. I served a church once that had furniture that was just ratty. And they wouldn't throw it out because somebody 80 years ago gave it. When I finally convinced them to get rid of it, we put it out by the dumpster, and the trash pickers wouldn't even take it. Friday at our Pride service, John Gerard talked about his transition from being a mortician to being a minister. And he said he used to be in the death business, and now he's in the life business. And that's what Jesus says. Don't be in the death business, be in the life business. When churches are debating about the orientation of a person who can be ordained or not ordained, they're in the death business. When churches are debating about who can be married in their churches and who can't, they're in the death business. When churches are debating who can be included and excluded, they're in the death business. And Jesus says, you're in the life business. You're in the life business. Let the dead bury the dead. This is an old story, but I forget his first name. Forbes, who was the pastor at Riverside Church in New York City, was on a flight, and you know how you get caught in these conversations with the person next to you, and you always think of something that will kill the conversation so you can go back to whatever you're doing. And this person was talking to Forbes about, you know, what they did, and the guy finally said, well, what do you do? And Forbes looked at him and he said, I raise the dead. I raise the dead. And I thought, what a great definition of a Christian. I raise the dead. I'm in the life business. The third attitude that Jesus wants his disciples to have is one of urgency. A person asks to follow Jesus, and Jesus says, okay, and the person says, let me go home and settle some things. Let me go home and settle some things. And Jesus says, no, it's urgent. Seize the day. I think how often I put stuff off, and how often people put stuff off with me. Let's get together. Let's get together for lunch sometime. 15 months later, I'm still waiting for that person to call me. I'll email you tomorrow, and you're still waiting. We put stuff off. I know I should contact that person and I just don't get around to it. I know I should forgive that person and I just can't screw up the courage. I know I should go see that person and I think, I don't have the energy right now. And Jesus says, disciples can't put it off. Seize the day. So Jesus wants his disciples to be specific in their love, in their forgiveness, in their caring. He wants them to be in the life business, not the death business. And he wants them to do it now. It's kind of a hard Jesus. Now, when people go on mission trips, invariably they come back and they say, I went on that trip expecting to give so much. And what I did was receive. I received so much. I had no idea how much I would receive. I think that's what Jesus is telling his disciples. You have no idea how much love you will receive as you give it. You have no idea how much forgiveness you will receive as you give it. You have no idea how much mercy you will receive when you give it. And it's just the Beatitudes. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. The mission trips are always a blessing. And Jesus knows that the mission trip of his disciples will be a blessing for them. May it be so.